Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise tonight to speak to Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act. Of course, Bill C-11 seeks to modernize the existing Broadcasting Act for the first time since 1991, primarily to bring online streaming services like Netflix and YouTube within its domain. In my view, well, it's been a long time. C-11 is certainly needed. We need to modernize the Broadcasting Act. I also feel it's well-intentioned legislation on behalf of the governing party, and it has good items in it. I'll mention a few. One, of course, is a requirement for streaming services like Netflix to invest more in Canadian productions. Secondly, that it legitimizes the role of community broadcasting. This includes nonprofit and campus radio stations, acknowledging that community broadcasters, through collaboration with local organizations and community members, are in a unique position to be able to provide varied programming to meet the needs of their communities. That being said, Bill C-11 also has significant issues. First, that in it we see all throughout vague language, some contradictions. At times it's fairly poorly written. I'll give you one example. In a section I'll be talking about next, there's a definition of social media service without that term actually being defined earlier in the bill. Of course, as we've heard from others, it skips over a really critical opportunity to update and clarify the definition of what is Canadian content. And most importantly of all, that despite claims that only platforms would be regulated, there are very clear provisions in the bill that allow for user-generated content to be regulated, and the chair of the CRTC confirmed as much when he was in front of the Heritage Committee. One of those provisions is any time that user-generated content generates either direct or indirect revenue. What does that mean? Well, I think about a local musician who might be soliciting financial contributions on a YouTube live stream, for example, and whether that musician might fall under the regulations that are permitted under this act. Now, I want to be really clear. There are some who have said that this bill censors what Canadians would be allowed to watch. That's simply not true. That is not in this legislation. That said, both at committee and in the wider conversation across the country on this bill, nonpartisan experts and those affected by the legislation have shared their concerns. I'd like to share a few of those with you, Madam Speaker, this evening. One is YouTube content creators themselves, Canadians like Morgan Faultier. Morgan said this: Bill C-11 is not an ill-intentioned piece of legislation, but it's a bad piece of legislation. It's been written by those who don't understand the industry they're attempting to regulate. Many more others are on the record with their concerns similar to Morgan, other YouTube content creators across the country. Then, of course, there are also subject matter experts like Michael Geist, who've sounded the alarm. Now, he's written often on the topic. Of course, he spoke at committee. I hesitate to even bring up Mr. Geist, given how often he's already been referenced in this debate over the last number of weeks. I'll just quote him briefly, one snippet that I think is important for this House to hear again, that Bill C-11 needs, in quotes, extensive review and further reform to get it right. Finally, political analyst Erica Ifill shared her many concerns in a recent Hill Times article. She put it succinctly: the new broadcasting bill still does not address core problems of the digital experience. For my part, recognizing some of these issues, I brought two amendments to committee. One would have removed the various sections.
You're sharing your time with me.
I will pause here for a moment to let Madam Speaker know I'll be sharing my time with the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, for my part, I brought two amendments to the committee. One would have removed every section in 4.2 of the bill that allowed for user-generated content to be regulated at all. To say, okay, there are various provisions here that open up that opportunity. Why not close those? To be really clear that platforms are in and users are out. The second was more precise but less ambitious. To say, okay, let's just remove those users who generate indirect revenue. Can we not at least agree on that? That that's a group of users that this likely wasn't intended for, so let's take that out. Again, parliamentarians, I think from all parties, have previously said they believe in this premise of platforms in, users out. And so yeah, I was disappointed that both these amendments were defeated at committee. I'd also like to briefly note my disappointment in the process. It wasn't the best moment that we saw the animosity between committee members, between opposing parties in this chamber, and that resulted in the majority of votes on amendments last Tuesday night had to take place without any debate at all. I think in my time here, I've seen better moments. I can think of back in December where members came together to unanimously move forward on banning conversion therapy, for example. There have been incredible moments in this place of parliamentarians working together. In my view, that was one of our less strong moments as parliamentarians. To summarize then, in my view, when assessing legislation, I find myself thinking about my neighbors in Kitchener. And for our community, I ask myself, does this bill do more harm than good? And I get it. Rarely will I get to vote on legislation that fully addresses the interests of my community. So my sense is I'll always support legislation that has a net positive impact. My concern with C-11 is that it could do more harm than good. This is the reason I didn't support it earlier this afternoon, and I'm not likely to support it at third reading tomorrow. I appreciate the good intentions. I appreciate that there are good elements in the bill. I certainly wish we had more time to debate it and even to see more negotiation amongst parliamentarians to see amendments tabled and moved forward with. And assuming it'll soon be moving to the Senate, I hope they take the opportunity to improve the bill. Thank you.